Hello, welcome to the 9th episode of the Delora Dabbles podcast. Why am I showing you guys the Cassandra again? Because I'm a very silly girl. If you notice in my Cassandra review, I talk about how this, and I even point to the whorls and I say, this is the 12 to 1, this is the 10 to 1, this is the 8 to 1, and this is the 6 to 1. Most manufactured wheels nowadays, in fact all manufactured wheels I have ever seen, every book I've ever read on the subject, and all the spinning books I've read have been published in the last 15 years, with the majority of them having been published in the last 10 years, with only a handful being in the 15 to 20 year range. All of the mass-produced wheels now, that would be true. That would be totally true. On all of the mass-produced wheels, your smallest looking whorl is the fastest with the most twist ratio. What you would say like 12 to 1. The number is bigger. Because of where the whorl is on this wheel in relation to the drive wheel, because this is the whorl, this is the drive wheel, it is not the case. The opposite is true with the Cassandra. I've been spinning fine lace weights on the 6 to 1 whorl. So this is the 6 to 1, this is the 8 to 1, this is the 10 to 1, and this is the 12 to 1. How funny. Yes, can you tell I'm a spindle spinner yet? I'm used to slow going, but I will say that this right here, it wasn't spun on the 6 to 1, it was actually spun on the 8 to 1 here, because I did notice the difference between these two, and it still didn't occur to me that I had my whorl ratios opposite. So this was actually spun on the 8 to 1, and I will say that my lace weight is practically perfect because it takes longer. You look at your yarn for a longer period of time while you're spinning. It's not as fast, so of course you catch mistakes quicker. Hilarious. Most people advise that you start on the whorl ratio. Let's see. Because here's the thing. People will say the smallest whorl ratio, and they mean the 6 to 1. Then they'll say the largest whorl, and then they mean the 6 to 1. So that's another confusing kind of nomenclature in the spinning world, is that the largest whorl is always associated with the smallest ratio. So for the purpose of this video, I don't know what I'm going to do to reduce the confusion. I'm going to say the lowest ratio and the highest ratio, just so that we don't get any confusions here. Because as you can see with the Cassandra, largest whorl and smallest whorl does not always mean the same thing on the same wheels. Does not always mean the same thing on different wheels. Okay, so most people recommend that you start on the lowest whorl ratio, which would be the 6 to 1, and work your way up. Which I invariably did, but I was thinking that this was the 12 to 1. So now I am actually working my way up like you're supposed to, and getting used to the different speed. I should have done that sooner instead of spinning all of these projects. What do I mean by all of these projects? I'll show you all of these projects I've been doing on a 6 to 1. Oh, okay. I laugh because I thought I knew it, and I didn't. And it's humbling and embarrassing at the same time, but it is a necessary lesson for everyone. So, yeah. Again, for clarity, again, this is the 6 to 1, this is the 8 to 1, this is the 10 to 1, this is the 12 to 1. And as soon as I realized that something was going on, and I checked my whorl ratios, and actually before I put this up, I just want to show you guys how I did that. It's not very hard to figure out on your own. In fact, I figured it out on my own with my Charkha. I just put a dot on the spindle up here, and I very slowly rotated my drive wheel right here. Very slowly rotated it, and every time I saw the dot, I counted. You could do that with this because it has the quill attachment. Whenever you take off the flyer head, it has the quill attachment. That, I think, would be easier to count than the way that I have read in other various books how to do it. If you have a bobbin and flyer wheel that is not the Cassandra, does not have a quill attachment, what you can do to count your wheel ratios, and here's what I do. That's why this tape is here, because that's what I was doing. So this tape is here so that I know where my 12 o'clock position is. 12 o'clock being straight up. For me on the Cassandra, all I had to do was put a dot on the quill and count how many times I saw the dot. Simple. On a flyer though, and let me not take the flyer off because that would be silly. On the flyer, you're going to tie something around one of the flyers, preferably something bright so you can see it. That's what all the books tell you to do. You're going to tie something here, and you're going to slowly move your wheel and count how many times you see the flyer move. That specific flyer with the thing tied around it. That's what makes counting your whorl ratios on a flyer, bobbin, wheel, I think, very, very crazy. Because I did that at first. I read in the book and I was like, oh, I could do that. And then I got to it and I was like, oh, this is crazy. This is so hard to count because you've got 2 flyers and you're only counting one of them. So I was like, oh my god, I have a quill attachment. I'll just count my whorl ratios like I did on my Charkha. Duh. So, but yeah, that's how you do it. And however many X number of times your flyer goes around, that is your ratio. X to 1. Again, with X being how many times your flyer made a full revolution versus how many times your drive wheel made 1 revolution. That's what the 1 is in the X to 1, is the 1 turn of this. So, anyway, enough about spinning wheels. And let me talk about some of my projects because it all has to do with that misconception about my wheel. So here we have my Peruvian wool. This is overspun, like it's overplied, I should say. The singles are not overspun because I spun these on the 6-to-1 ratio. And these are about 30 WPI singles. One of them was a 30 one of my plies, my first one. It was actually, let me look at the numbers on here because I know which ones they were. Yes, my first ply, my first full bobbin of wool was a 30 WPI that went into the 20s a lot. The other 2 were the 30s that went into the 20 WPI range less and less as I went on. So, yeah, I still have a thick and thin yarn. It's just not drastically thick and thin because it's a 3-ply. But it is overplied. I'm going to have to put this back through my wheel. And what I mean by that is I'm going to ball this. I haven't washed it yet at all. I'm going to ball it into center pull balls on my, where is it? Ball winder. It's somewhere around here. And I'm going to put it back through the wheel. I'm going to put it back through the wheel on a different ratio than what I spun it on, at a much faster clip as well, until I get the yarn that I want. Now, my yarn is not as over twisted as it would have been if I were not an experienced spindle spinner, so it's not too overplied. In fact, if I wanted to do socks with this, this is a DK weight, so I wouldn't do socks with it, because I really like my fingering weight socks. Yeah, if I wanted to make something extremely durable out of this, the Peruvian wool really lends itself to stronger yarns that you can spin stronger without feeling ropey. So this does not feel ropey, but it feels firm, and that's not what I want because I want it to be a more balanced yarn for garments. That's the other thing about unbalanced yarn in garments. It'll make your fabric, your finished knitted or crocheted fabric, bias, where it tilts a bit. So if anyone sews, you know that a fabric that is sewn on the bias is drastically different than a fabric sewn on the weave, like cut and sewn parallel to the weave pattern. A bias is where you cut and sew 90 degrees to the thing. How do I describe this? Note card. Yes, here we go. Imagine this is a piece of fabric. You're gonna and let's say that this is a pants leg. You are going to sew it like this. This is regular sewing. This is sewing parallel to the weaving pattern. If you were to make a pair of pants on the bias, you do this number here. See how the points of this card are doing this? That is on the bias. This is what happens when you have over twisted yarn. If you are knitting from a pattern that is assuming you have yarn like this, and then you are knitting with hand spun yarn that is more like, hold on, let me twist this again. That is more like, haha. If your finished yarn is more like this and you go to knit a garment with yarn like this, when the pattern is supposed to be for yarn like this, you're going to have a lot of problems with drape, fit, all kinds of stuff. So that's why I'm going to put it back through the wheel. Okay, that was a lot. So sorry. So yeah, these were, and here's a really hilarious thing about how these got so over twisted. I don't think I explained that. These were spun on the 6-to-1 ratio, what I thought was the 12-to-1. They were plied on 12-to-1, which I thought was the 6-to-1. So I applied them very quickly, but they still got over twisted. So whenever I put this back through the wheel, what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to put it back through the wheel in the opposite direction that I applied them. So I applied them S, I'm going to put them back through the wheel Z, and I'm going to put them back through the wheel on the 10-to-1 ratio. One whorl down from what I overapplied them as, and that should give me what I need. If I start to spin this and I find that it completely unravels my plies, or I'm getting something under twisted off the bobbin, then I'll go down and down until I hit the right whorl where I can unply it at a very good speed. If you want to do something faster, always change your whorl size. Don't treadle faster. That's not going to do anything. Changing your whorl size is how you go faster, basically. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start at the 10-to-1, see where I get, see what I get, and go down each whorl size from there until I'm happy with my ply. Basically, I'm doing plying in reverse. That's how I have to fix this issue. So, funny that it happened. I can tell you guys how I plan to fix it and how it comes out when I get around to doing it. This, baby, the singles were spun on the 6-to-1, and they are being plied right now on the 8-to-1, and they are underplied. I'm actually pleased with it, and I'm going to keep plying it on the 8-to-1 because I plan on doing a lace weight shawl with this, and I think that the underplied 2-ply lace weight is going to really open up some of the intricate lace patterns that I have planned for this. Yes. And this baby here, these singles were actually spun on the 10-to-1. They are a really nice 45 WPI lace weight single, and I was going to continue along on this project before I got bored and started plying this. I got bored because it was too slow. It was too slow because it was the 6-to-1 and not a 12-to-1. I was not on an appropriate ratio. So I started plying. After I finished plying this and playing around with my wheel between finishing plying this and not yet plying the rest of it is whenever I realized my detrimental mistake. So I will not be working on this project again until I am comfortable on a few more whorls up and I'm going fast enough to not get bored. Pretty funny. So, and this, by the way, is going to be a 4-ply hawser. That's why the bobbin is so skinny and underfilled, is because this is going to be one of just 4 plies. And I'll do a project in depth on a hawser ply if you are unfamiliar with it. So, yeah, so those are my projects right now. And because I've been really backed up this week, well, not this week, I've been backed up because I skipped a week, I just want to share with you guys that finals went well. I'm done with them. I finished them on Wednesday. I have a job interview, well, not a job, an internship interview tomorrow, and hoping it all goes well. I am back to, now that school is over, I'm back to catering with a friend part-time. He's an event planner, so we're not always catering. Sometimes I'm a bartender, sometimes I'm a food runner. It depends because it's event planning and you really want people who are going to do a little bit of everything, and I'm one of those people for him that does a little bit of everything very well. So I'm back to doing that in my spare time, back to doing all the odd jobs that I used to do to support myself. now that the student loans aren't supporting me. So we'll see all of the fun shenanigans that come from that. I really do hope to have an Etsy shop open in August or September, and I'm still standing by that. So we'll see how everything evolves over the next few months. It's a little up in the air right now. So, yes. And I will say that even though I know I could ply this faster if I go up some whorl ratios, I don't want my two different skeins of this, my two different bobbins of plied yarn, to be drastically different. So I'm going to continue plying it, the other bobbin, exactly the way I applied this one, even though it is slower than it could be. Sometimes whenever you make a mistake, if you want to keep your stuff uniform and you don't want to completely redo everything, you compensate for that mistake by continuing to make it so that your yarns are the same. That is the only way to guarantee that your yarn is the same when you're using different tools or a complicated tool like a wheel. You just do everything on the same ratios in predominantly the same amount of time. That's what's going to make sure that it's as consistent as you can get it at your skill level. So, I got a comment on the 8th episode's podcast about spindle wheels. So I want to touch on spindle wheels a little bit, but I'm going to go in more detail with them next episode because I have not yet played with the quill on the Cassandra. But I know a lot about my Charkha, so next episode, the 10th episode, is going to be more about the quill on the Cassandra and using the Cassandra as a spindle wheel. This episode, I'm going to talk more about the Charkha here. Oh, let me not drop my Turkish. So this is a Charkha. This is one of the earliest ever invented wheels, or wheels of this style right here. And you can see that my drive band is a piece of waxed linen. And my whorls are here. I've got other videos on this, but I'm basically just going to run through this very quickly. If you have more questions on Charkhas, check out some of my other Charkha videos that I filmed a while back. This is my 16 to 1 right here. This is my 14 to 1, and this is my 12 to 1. This is a historical reproduction Charkha, but the funny thing is that when I was on the phone with John Sherman of JMS Wheels, we talked for a while, and we talked about my Charkha actually. My Charkha came up as a topic of conversation because I was asking him about the quill on the wheel. So here's the thing about this wheel. It has a modernized whorl. So this is a historical looking Charkha except for the whorl. It's been modernized. So even I wanted to say that because that's something that I learned that is actually kind of cool, makes a lot of sense, because whenever I first got this wheel I was like, wow, I wonder how they would have made something like this back in the day, because I can tell she turned this on a lathe. Because they didn't. The whorl is modernized. Okay, enough of that. With a Charkha, you have to spin woolen, you have to spin long draw. Why? Because one of your hands is always turning this. Always. Always, 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 always. Now, I'm going to rearrange some stuff and do a demonstration so that you guys can actually see me spin on this. And it's been a little while since I spun on this, but I'm spinning cotton right now, which is what Charkhas are the best at still. You don't really want to spin you don't want to spin cotton on a bobbin and flyer wheel. You definitely want something that's going to put a lot of twist in very quickly, and you are only limited in speed by how fast you can turn your arm. So whenever I start doing this demonstration, you'll see how quickly I turn this drive wheel, and why, even though my drive ratios don't sound that impressive, they're 12, 14, and 16 to 1, I can still make extremely good cotton at a very fast rate of speed. Okay guys, so I have my cotton here. These are, this cotton is from Paradise Fibers, and it is from a roving, oh no, it's sliver. That's right. This is sliver. That's exactly what they call it. This sliver has just been broken into short sections. I have not pre-drafted it. I do prefer to slightly, I attenuate the fibers. That's the exact kind of pre-drafting method I'm using. I'm not splitting it to make it skinnier. I'm really just attenuating the fibers to give them a little breath of air so that they're not all tugging at once, because you're going to see here in a second I am doing a very traditional long draw on this charkha, because that's really the only way that you can spin yarn on a charkha. I mean, you could try other ways, I'm sure, but this is just what I do. So, okay. Now you can see that I have cotton already on here, and you really start a charkha off the same way you would start a drop spindle or a spinning wheel. It's same things, just different modes. Now I have a fat piece of cotton off here at the end. I'm just gonna reattach it the way I always reattach my woolen stuff. I fluff it out, and this is a little bit kinky, so I'm just gonna fluff it out even more. And the twist has been asleep in this for a little while, so I'm having to manually untwist this tail a little. Fluff it out with my fingers some more. I've got a nice, very fluffy end. Because I'm on camera, I made sure it was extra fluffy so I don't have any problems. I'm just going to droop them right over each other. This is my favorite way to join when I'm doing a woolen spun. Now, I am on the 14:1 ratio because I want my 3-ply cotton singles to equal out to a DK weight. And I already did all the calculations for that. So, I have a spinner's control card for this laying around somewhere, but I'm just going to eyeball it for the purposes of this video. So here you see I have achieved full integration from my stuff to my sliver. Here we get into the long draw. I have a very light grasp on my sliver. It's not a death grasp. I am letting everything move out, and I'm letting the fibers pass through my fingers. Not a death grasp. Not a death grasp. I'm letting it do whatever the whorl is telling it to do. That's what you have to do with a traditional long draw such as this. Okay. This is not done. You cannot pack this onto the spindle. It will fall apart. I'm not going to show you guys how it's going to fall apart because it's kind of a pain in the ass. You're not done. You pinch this, keep pulling, and you'll feel the yarn give, and it is the scariest feeling in the world because you're literally feeling yourself untwist this yarn. You're going to put in a little bit of twist, and you keep doing it. But if you notice, some of my bigger bumps are thinning out. The only thing with this is that sometimes your extremely thin areas will also drift apart before your slubs do. So that's why you would rather want to have thicker slubs and where you want, and thicker slubs and where you want, than anything that gets too thin like here and there, as I can see. I said it's been a while since I was on a charkha, and that's predominantly what I meant. Put a little bit more twist in. And you want to put twist in while you're doing this because you want these areas that are thinning out to get the twist they need to stay together so that they don't fall apart. It's getting a little bit harder to draft these slubs out. And for the most part, from my eyeball and my level of eccentricity with this, I think this is good. The only thing I'm going to do, I'm going to put a bunch of this in here so that whenever I release my slack, I'm not going to lose anything and nothing's going to fall apart. Let's see what we have now. This looks much more consistent now. This slub, still not happy with it. This is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to very carefully, just draft that little part out. Untwist this. The more accurate way to have done this, now that I'm thinking about it, and I have this horrible pigtail here, is what I should have done was walk this between my fingers like this to that slob, done it like this, and voila, no pigtails. That's how you really should do it. Don't do what I do. Do what I do the second time. Don't do what I do the first time. And you're going to keep putting twist in. Cotton is very forgiving as far as over twisting goes. And I will tell you right now, your cotton is not going to get ropey like wools do when you over twist it. They're just going to be stronger, and they sure as hell won't fall apart on you. And now we wind it on, and I seem to have made a very, very large make that I should have probably made smaller. Again, it's been about a month and a half, 2 months since I spun on my Charkha. And here's another thing about using a multitude of different tools and rotating them out. I'm sure if I go a month and a half without using a drop spindle, I'll be rusty. And probably the first few times I do it will not be as uniform and delicious and wonderful as the yarns I spun on my spindle before I went on hiatus, or how I remember how easy it was to spin. So here you can see we've got the slubs again. I'm showing it twice for clarity. So we're just going to pull this. You can see that the slubs are evening out. Put more twist in. The slubs are evening out. I probably put a little bit too much twist in that time. And it's a very slow process whenever you're evening out these slubs. This is the part where you have to be careful. The part where you actually draft it out into the yarn-like bit, that first pull, that's very quick. This part is not so quick. I like my force of twist because here's the thing. On a spindle and a Charkha or any spindle wheel, I assume, you can feel the force of twist. If you were to hold your yarn on a bobbin and flyer wheel right before the orifice and twist it like this, you could feel it too. I just feel like a bobbin and flyer wheel does not give you the same opportunity to feel a force of twist. As you see, as these pieces of cotton are pigtailing, I can feel it here in my fingers. I can feel that force of twist as they unwind, as they wind, unwind, wind, and so on. I can feel that in my fingers. You would not make such a long make of yarn, and I keep doing that. That's the mistake that I keep doing whenever I'm showing this, is that I'm making too large of a make. This is the angle that I prefer to spin at as well. So the angle from where you're sitting on a Charkha versus a bobbin and flyer wheel like the Cassandra or any of the modern bobbin and flyer wheels, you are going to sit pretty much somewhere in front of the orifice, and if you were to spin on a Charkha that way, you would be facing this direction. If you have the orifice right in front of you, like on the Cassandra, this is where your Charkha would be positioned. And you would either go this way, or if you hold your fiber supply in the right hand, you would go this way, but then you can't turn the Charkha, so you have to go this way, whether you're right or left-handed. So, also, you would have to go this way. You can't go this way with it, and you can't go that way with it. That's not how it works. You want to really sit at an angle. I've seen people go from this angle to this angle to this angle, all the way to a perfect this angle, with it being positioned more like this. So you're going to be here, you're going to do this. You see this on the great wheels, which are more of a European style. The drive wheel is huge, and this part is longer. The whole thing is basically like a giant Charkha with legs. Think of that as a great wheel. And obviously, whether you're spinning wool or cotton or whatever, if you're using a great wheel or a spindle wheel with a hand turn, you're spinning woolen and you're spinning long draw. That's how you have to do it because you've only got one hand available. So, a lot of modern Western spinners do not really like spindle wheels because it's not so common to spin one-handed. It's not even common for spinners to start on a drop spindle anymore. A lot of people will buy a wheel outright and start learning how to spin on a bobbin and flyer wheel, and they never reach out to these other tools. And I think that every tool is amazing in its own way. And I'm not flacking on people who only spin on one tool. Some people, like myself, I was limited by my finances for the longest period of time, and all I could afford was drop spindles. I moved up to this Charkha, which I bought from a craftsman for $40. The shipping was $12. And then my bobbin and flyer wheel is from JMS Wheels. It was $300 because I got the full package with 8 bobbins and a lazy Kate. So you can see that everything that I have has been an up in price as well as an up in complexity and craftsmanship. So it's kind of cool, and I think that that's a magical journey in any craft. Like whenever you start drawing as a kid, you're using crayons, you're using cheap crayons. As you get older, you get to the color pencils. You get even older, you get into those, I'm sorry, I've got cotton in my nose now. Those short stapled fibers are the worst. They get all over my face and in my hands and on my clothes. I've got a little bit of cotton, so it's in my nose. And then as you go, like let's go back to the drawing analogy. As you go up, you get these pencils that say HB such and such, and it's the exact softness of the graphite. So now your tool is getting a little bit more expensive, but your tool is also getting more precise. And you keep going and going and going, and maybe you stop drawing and you go into painting, you hit a divergence. All crafts are like that. All crafts are like that. And I think it's beautiful whenever you start with the rudimentary stuff, the beginner stuff, and go through it as you should. I think it makes you better at what you do. And even if you have already started off on a bobbin and flyer wheel, or you've only ever spun on a spindle wheel, I think it's great to go back and forward. It's not too late. It's not too late. It's not too late to go backward if you've already got a bobbin and flyer wheel. And it's not too late on a Charkha to do both at the same time. Branch out. It's fun. I've never spun on a supported spindle, so right now that is the only spinning tool, generalized spinning tool, that I don't have. I've got drop spindles, spindle wheel, bobbin and flyer wheel. I do not have a supported spindle. So we'll see if I get to try that in the next year. Supported spindles tend to be a little bit more expensive. So, especially the handcrafted ones on Etsy. So we'll see where I go with that. But I do hope that you enjoyed my tidbits of information in this podcast. And before I let you go, I do actually have for you the book review on the Alden Amos Handbook of Spinning, which I will start in a minute. Hey guys, so here she is, finally the book I've been yammering about all this time. The Alden Amos Big Book of Handspinning. This has got to be the most extensive book I have ever come across on the subject of spinning yarn. It's got a little bit of historical, a little bit of modern stuff, lots of opinions. This guy's very opinionated. There were a few times in this book where I got caught up in his opinions and I put too much credence into what he said that I started to feel kind of bad as a spinner, because he has a very specific idea of what perfect yarn is and what standard of quality hand spuns should be at. When in reality, this is a craft, and what you prefer to make is what you prefer to make. I mean, I don't prefer to make art yarns, but I'm not going to shit on someone for making art yarn. And I feel like beginners who make under-twisted yarn, if they read this book and they read what he has to say about underplied yarns, they're going to feel like shit. So it can be an intimidating read at times because he is so opinionated. I'm not going to get too much into that right now because I want to talk about the things I like about this book first before I get into any criticisms. I'm going to run you pretty much kind of through the table of contents. Chapter 1 is pretty basic. It's how spinning works, drafting and tug and spin. Chapter 2 is more about fibers, so the different kinds of fibers. Chapter 3 is spinning wheels and scouring. Chapter 4 is grist, twist, fiber, spinning method. It kind of combines a lot of the stuff from the previous chapters with some newer, more specific information. So he does kind of ease you into his eccentric calculations. He's got a lot of eccentric calculations and ideas about science now. Chapter 5 is accuracy in measuring length, accuracy in measuring weight, that kind of stuff. Chapter 6, he again gets very calculation eccentric in how wool is measured at standard, because everyone who knows about wool and knits and crochets or anything knows that wool can absorb 3 times its weight in water. So he talks about how humid weather can make wool weigh more, and therefore wool has to be weighed at standard. I can understand wool being weighed at standard in mass manufacturing areas where small increments of, how do I say this? A small margin of error in a large factory makes a large margin of error. If you were buying Rollags or something like that off of Etsy, it doesn't matter what level of humidity that person lives in. You're not going to be... He makes it out like if wool isn't weighed at standard, you're paying for water. And that's not really the case, because most people don't live in such humid areas that is the case. It's mostly a negligible difference, especially on Etsy when you're only buying a few ounces at a time, 8 at the most, I think. I think most people who prep fibers and sell them on Etsy cap off at 12 ounces. Most of them cap off at 8 though. So unless the people who are selling fleeces for a pound, I don't know. But that's still a negligible difference. You're not buying a bunt that weighs 36 pounds. So a margin of error that you find with the humidity in wool at those small increments of 4 ounces to a pound are absolutely negligible. But from what he says, it seems like it's a huge deal, and he kind of makes you scared that you're going to be paying for water if the wool wasn't weighed at standard. So he gets a little eccentric. He gets a little eccentric about how you need to scour wool in soft water only. I'll get more into that later. Chapter 7, he talks about distaffs, refining your spinning skills, spinning wheels. He talks about hiring out your fiber prep, but that I feel is dated. He also talks about bugs, how to get rid of bugs. 8 is wheel mechanics, how they work. I love this. This is what he knows. This is what he's good at. Chapter 8 is gold. I have nothing bad to say about Chapter 8. Chapter 9, purposeful yarn. He again gets a little bit judgy with how he thinks yarn should be, but he raises some, I think, important considerations. But don't judge yourself based off of his considerations. Chapter 10, equipment for winding skeins versus equipment for unwinding skeins. This is one of those things that I kind of agree with. An umbrella swift, like what I have, is more suited to unwinding a skein than for winding a skein. If you want to wind the beautiful skeins that you see in stores or on really professional Etsy shops, you're going to want a skeiner winder that is more of an Amish style. So if you Google Amish style skein winder, you're going to see the kind of skein winder that is more suited to winding a skein. However, I only have an umbrella swift. That's what I use for everything. My skeins up here of the Peruvian wool that I showed you guys before, they're very serviceable for washing and unwinding and everything else. They just don't look as perfect as they could be if I was using the proper tool, but an umbrella swift is still serviceable. There's a lot of instances like this and like that in this book that if I went through every single one of them, I could be sitting here for days talking. So, chapter 11 is about plying and plying methods. He's very into rope making, and he talks about that a lot. I'm not into that, but it's interesting though. Chapter 12 is tools and equipment. It gets a little bit miscellaneous, but it's still good stuff to read. Chapter 13 really is the miscellaneous chapter, and it's got all kinds of stuff. So, when it comes to, and this is why I didn't talk about my opinion on scouring wool, because I've never personally scoured wool. However, I had a very good conversation with John Sherman on the phone. In that phone conversation, I talked about scouring, and I mentioned this book, and John Sherman does not agree with a lot of the things Alden Amos has to say. And it's not surprising that there are several camps within the spinning community that have very strong opinions leaning one way or the other. That's not surprising to me at all. You find that with just about any, if you look at fandoms. It's the same for fandoms, it's the same for crafts, sports, everything. So it's not surprising. So, Alden Amos thinks that you absolutely should always scour yarn in soft water. John Sherman pointed out that, historically speaking, most people's water came from wells. That's very hard water. That's like very, very hard water. And they've been washing fleece just fine for thousands of years. So it's not a no-no, guys. I'm here to tell you guys it's not a no-no. I really think that whether you use hard or soft water is just one of those preferences, and I think it's negligible, honestly. I think that a lot of things in the spinning world are negligible, except when your yarn is falling apart, everyone, while you're trying to knit with it, I think everyone can agree that that's bad yarn. That, I think, is really the extent that my opinions in strength go. Now, I do have some strong opinions that I hold myself to. Like, I like Alden Amos's idea of plying at distance. He gets a little eccentric with evening out your twist in your yarn. So I've got some videos on how I ply at distance, and so I won't talk about the mechanics of plying at distance, but twist does move like water. If you imagine water in a pan, think that there are barriers there. So you've got hills and valleys, you've got these waves of water in a pan, and let's just imagine that they are stationary waves, like what you'd see on a beach but not moving. That's your yarn. And between every make of yarn, you're going to have some difference in twist. It's inevitable, especially on a wheel, and especially if you're first starting out. So, if water takes the path of least resistance, if you were to take the imaginary barriers in place in that pan with the stationary waves of water, they would all equalize. That is the idea behind plying at distance. And skeining your finished plied yarn at distance. You're evening out some of that twist, right? Because you're letting the twist expand over the barriers that I was talking about. Is between every make of yarn you're winding onto something, and the twist doesn't move through the yarn if the yarn is wound onto something. So whenever you ply at distance, you have a distance of that spans a bedroom, probably, whatever room you're in. That distance is going to equalize the yarn on that length, and it's going to equalize the twist throughout, theoretically speaking. I think that that's a good theory. I ascribe to that theory. I agree with Alden Amos on that. I ply at distance. However, Alden Amos thinks that you should always, after you spin a single, you should then wind that yarn, your single, onto a storage bobbin. And then ply that single. Also at distance. So he's putting a lot of extra steps into it, and I've just pretty much taken things of his that I've agreed with because I feel like they make sense, and I've tailored them to actually being practical in some instances, because he can be impractical at times. Just because he's got these very judgmentally high standards of yarn. So that's what I have to say about the Alden Amos Big Handbook of Hand Spinning. Big Book of... I cannot say this. Alden Amos Big Book of Hand Spinning. I've been calling it the Handbook of Spinning instead of the Big Book of Hand Spinning for months now. So, old habits. But yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this book review. I hope you'll stay tuned for the next episode whenever I do talk about spindle spinning on the Cassandra. And I talked about spindle spinning on this Charkha, so next we're going to do the Cassandra. We're going to compare the Cassandra to the Charkha in the next episode. So if you are interested, definitely make sure that you check out the next video for that one. Happy crafting and bye-bye.